Hello, hello and welcome everybody. I'm very happy to see you. My name is Ana Elena Gonzalez and I'm the director of the Center for Mexican Studies of the National Autonomous University of Mexico in the United Kingdom. And today it is a great pleasure and a great honor to welcome Professor Patricia Murrieta Flores, who is going to give a very interesting talk. But first, I would like you to tell you a little bit about her trajectory. She specializes in historical archaeology and digital humanities. She is the co-director and chair of digital humanities at Lancaster University in the UK. Her research interests lie in 4 areas: the development and application of artificial intelligence methods for historical and archaeological research, the analysis of space and place through spatial technologies, decolonial approaches to technology, and Mesoamerican and early colonial history of Mexico. She has published widely about the creation and use of computational approaches in the humanities and has led multiple funded interdisciplinary projects. She is the principal investigator of projects such as Digging into Early Colonial Mexico, a large-scale computational analysis of historical sources, which is what she is going to present to us today, and also Unlocking the Colonial Archive, Harnessing Artificial Intelligence for Indigenous and Spanish American Collections. Welcome, Patty. The floor is yours, and we are very eager to hear you.
Thank you very much, Ana Elena. That's great. So I'm just going to share my screen. Could you let me know if that's working fine?
Yes, it's fine.
Is that okay? Okay, yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you again to Ana Elena and to all the team at UNAM here in the UK for inviting me to this session. I have been very eager to talk about this project with them as well, and thank you very much for attending this session too. So just a bit about my background. As Ana Elena said, I work in digital humanities, but I'm originally an archaeologist. And I worked many years in Mexico for the National Institute of Anthropology and History before coming to the UK to do my postgrad studies. And in Mexico, I work in historical archaeology, focusing particularly in the early sugar industry on the colonial plantations, basically, and haciendas of 16th century. But previous to that, I also did the mapping of archaeological sites in places like rural states like Quintana Roo, and I also did substantial work on the archaeological atlas of Chiapas at the INA Center there as well. And working particularly with atlases in general really made me think quite carefully about how ideas regarding the landscape basically emerge, and specifically looking at settlement patterns and so on led me to develop a very strong interest on a technology that is called geographic information systems, and more specifically as well to think about the influence of social aspects of life in the development of places. So how places come to be, how places are basically created, and also reflect quite substantially on the meaning of landscape. And so at the same time, I have been always quite technologically minded. So I ended up doing a master's in science and then a PhD in computational archaeology, which is very much a mix between computer science and archaeology, right? So, well, I was doing that, and especially working with geographic information systems. And I don't want to assume that all of you know what geographic information systems are, but for those of you that don't, if you have used Google Maps or Google Earth, you have in fact already used a geographic information system. And the difference basically with a professional GIS software is that beyond mapping, you can also carry out all sorts of spatial analysis with GIS. And so what is very interesting about this software is that it has this amazing capacity of holding thousands of pieces of geographic information, and then the capacity of analyzing them as well. And so one of the first thoughts that I had at the point that I was working and learning particularly about this technology was precisely the need for the kind of work that archaeologists at the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico and others were basically doing in terms of mapping and recording of Mesoamerican sites, but this should be also done for the colonial period, right? Because in Mexico, and particularly in archaeology, at least at that time, we focused quite substantially on the Mesoamerican period, but not that much in historical archaeology. So normally the colonial period is kind of like left to historians rather than archaeologists. And this is due also for a series of valid reasons, but working particularly with the colonial sugar industry made me very much realize that there was a substantial amount of information that is, of course, in archives, but as I said, this was usually used by historians, and there was not that much, resources, particularly about recording colonial sites. And of course, the National Coordination of Archaeology and the National Coordination of Historical Monuments at INA holds a substantial record of the sites that INA actually manages, but there is nothing really beyond that. And so this was also related to the work that we have been doing at the time here at Lancaster with our team of the Spatial Humanities Project. And we developed at that time a methodology that is called Geographical Text Analysis. So I'm going to talk a bit about this method later today. But by that time, I was starting to develop a strong focus on computational methods to analyze information contained in historical sources. And what geographical text analysis, in short, basically allows you to do is to identify, extract, and then analyze geographic information from written sources, right? So when we were developing that, I met in this wonderful conference that is called Computer Applications and Quantitative Methods in Archaeology, a colleague of mine, Diego Jimenez Vadillo, who works at INA at the Museum of Templo Mayor. And we started talking about geographical text analysis and the need of having an historical gazetteer, basically, of Mexico, right? Because one of the things that we know about works in historical geography of Mexico is that they rely substantially in local and contained case studies that are, of course, necessary, but that is quite difficult to do analysis as well at larger scales, not only due to the complexity of the early colonial settlements because of the reconfigurations, and historical circumstances that made settlements disappear, move, shift, etc., but also because often to gather substantial amounts of information in one place is very much a task of a lifetime. So today, I want to talk to you about two projects that I have designed with these specific problems in mind, not only on how to gather substantial amounts of information through computational means, but also to how to possibly analyze all these at a landscape scale. And I hope that you find this interesting. So the projects that I'm going to be talking about, the first one is called Digging into Early Colonial Mexico, a large-scale computational analysis of 16th century historical sources. And the second one is called Unlocking the Colonial Archive, Harnessing Artificial Intelligence for Indigenous and Spanish American Historical Collections. And the first one we started in 2018, and we are about to finish it in September, just next month, basically this year. And the second, we just started this February, and we are very much excited about it. So I'll tell you a bit more about this at the end of the talk. So the Digging into Early Colonial Mexico project was supported by the Transatlantic Platform of Humanities and Social Sciences, where 3 research councils in our case were involved. So these were the ESRC in the UK, CONACYT in Mexico, and FTC from Portugal. And we had around 15 researchers basically involved, and the partners were the Digital Humanities Center at the History Department here at Lancaster University, the Department of Computer Science from the University of Lisbon, and the Museum of Templo Mayor at the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico. Now, the focus of this project was was mainly threefold. So first of all, we wanted to create a series of computational approaches that will allow us to capture information at a large scale from historical primary sources in what we could define or we could call a big data style. And we also wanted to develop methods to analyze this data, and in doing so, answer a series of really interesting questions that are still out there related to issues of the Altepetul, this is to say, the territorial form of organization of Mesoamerican societies, and the changes in settlement pattern from what we call the Mesoamerican post-classic into the early colonial and, well, the 16th century, particularly colonial period, right? And so in order to do so, we focused the project on a single but quite complex historical source. And so being interested in these aspects of space and place, the first historical source that comes to mind in terms to colonial Mexico in general, particularly the 16th century, is the collection of the Relaciones Geográficas de la Nueva España, this is to say, the geographic reports of New Spain. And the reason for selecting this specific source is because directly or indirectly, whether you are interested in the Mesoamerican, particularly the post-classic period, or the colonial world, almost all research, especially for some parts of Mexico, such as central Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, Oaxaca, Michoacan, and of course, Guatemala, will touch on information related or contained within the Relaciones. Now, I don't want to assume either that all of you know what the geographic reports are, but for those of you that don't know, the geographic reports of New Spain are one of the major sources of information for the colonial period. So these constitute basically a massive compilation of information that was gathered between 1577 and 1585. And that was the product of a questionnaire that Philip II, who was the Spanish king at the time, orders, right? And the questionnaire had as the main aim to compile all sorts of information regarding the colonies of the Spanish realm, including the viceroyalty of New Spain. Now, the history behind the compilation of this historical source is really fascinating, but the great importance, particularly of this corpus, is that it contains, as I said before, thousands of pages of information about the situation of both the American, but also the Spanish communities at the time. So the questionnaire is created by the chronicler cosmographer of the Indies at the time, Juan López de Velasco, and the final version of it contains 50 questions in total. So the kind of information that this questionnaire collects is really important because both the corregidores and the alcaldes, this is to say, the people that in government for both the indigenous but also the Spanish town, gather typically a group in their office that will usually include indigenous elders and nobles that provided quite detailed information about each of the individual towns and cities that the information was compiled about. And of course, this didn't happen in all cases, but the collection certainly amasses great amount of data that talks about people, traditions, religion, government, military organization, language, and of course, resources and so on, right? So there is information, as you can see in this slide, about climate, geography, the types of commerce that happen in all sorts of regions, previous relationships between neighboring towns, but also fantastic information on plants, diseases, how to cure them, you name it. It's a fantastic resource. And in addition to this, there was also the request to accompany these questionnaires with as much information as possible on the geographies and place names, actually in Spanish, but also in the local languages, with further explanations of what place names, for instance, meant, details on local geographies, and so on. So a fantastic set of maps and also cartographic outputs emerged from the compilation of this information. And quite interestingly, the same as the information, this was done in a format sometimes that combined indigenous and the European knowledge, let's say, and styles, right? So from this, I can say without hesitation that this is an invaluable resource for the study of the colonial period in America, right? Now, the corpus that we have today is actually incomplete. We don't know yet the total number of documents in existence, and we have certainly knowledge of the ones that correspond to the North, Central, and South America, the Caribbean as well, but we know actually very little of the Philippines. And the majority of documents now known in the collection actually belong to the territory of New Spain, that includes what is today Mexico and Guatemala. And we haven't really found anything yet for the northern borderland of what is now today part of, for instance, Texas, California, and Florida. So most of the research looking to trace down all these documents took place in the 19th century when they were compiled. And so many of these reports were actually lost. But during the 19th century, several scholars then make great efforts to compile this information. And today there are 168 textual reports and 78 maps that actually survive, right? And so just to give you an idea, this is compiled in 12 volumes. The whole corpus has around 2.8 million words, and it covers the regions that you see particularly in this map. And so just to give you an idea of what it covers at least 50 provinces, more than 100 main jurisdictions or cabeceras, more than 200 subordinate jurisdictions, 400 or more major towns, and more than 2,000 small towns and villages. So information is truly astonishing. So if you think about it, this corpus contains at least what I will think is one of the main keys to continue the work of scholars about the changing nature of territoriality during the early colonial period that people like James Lockhart and Pedro Carrasco at some point, Charles Gibson, Peter Gerard, Howard Klein, and of course more recently people like Barbara Mundi and Federico Fernandez Chrysler. I have a complete list of people that I should mention here, but they have done very solid work regarding the historical reconfiguration of the Altepetl, this is to say the territorial organization before the contact with the Spanish and then during the colonial period as well. And this key relies precisely on looking at the colonial geographies at a landscape level and at a larger scale as well. But one of the main challenges, let's say, that you might have with these and with other historical sources for that matter, is that you have all this information, of course, but it is in written records. And it is really hard as a human, not only to hold all this information and make sense of it, but also to identify, for instance, larger patterns at different scales, right? And this is precisely where technologies come very handy. So the first thing that we set up to do within this particular project was the creation of the first digital 16th century gazetteer or historical gazetteer, better said, of Mexico, right? And in order to do so, we needed to identify and assign coordinates to all the places that are mentioned within these historical sources. And of course, we were supported by all sorts of scholarship that has been happening previous of us in general. But I have to say that this is easy to say, but it is hard to do. But we actually did it. So we compiled information for almost 15,000 places in total. And this include historical names and all sorts of spelling variations, and also all sorts of other important information, such as whether these places were cabeceras, sujetos, etc. And for this, we use a vast number of different resources, and this included secondary sources. So we did vast research regarding primary sources, secondary resources, databases, archaeological reports, and so on, to actually allocate geographic coordinates to these places. And this gazetteer was very much created by our team, and I have to acknowledge here our brilliant postdocs, Mariana Favila Vasquez and Raquel Iseras, and also one of my PhD students, Catherine Bellamy, who created very much this gazetteer on their own. Now, of course, as I was saying before, there are several challenges with this, right? But the primary two challenges are called linguistic disambiguation and geographic disambiguation. So this is to say that you need to solve problems like several places might have the same name, or they might have spelling variations of a name. And so you might have to first find a solution for that. And once you have actually done the linguistic disambiguation, then you need to find out where the specific place was, right? But even with these problems, we identify the vast majority of these places. And for the 12 volumes of relaciones that exist, and also another source called La Suma de la Visita de los Pueblos that was edited by Francisco del Pablo y Troncoso, we accomplish a very high percentage in the identification of the majority of 16th century places. In fact, some of these volumes were resolved at 100%. So this is to say that we managed to find and assign coordinates to all the places mentioned in the historical sources. And so the result of this is then a massive historical gazetteer with these thousands of records that are now available in Geographic Information System format, and that you can input if you wish into Google Maps, for instance, or Google Earth, and you can do also all sorts of advanced spatial analysis from this. But we also create, apart from this, an online database too that we are finishing up now, and that has the facility for you to search all sorts of information, but also to input information of it, because this kind of work is a kind of work that really never finishes. And so we want people also to contribute to the continued development, let's say, of this gazetteer as well. And so if you are actually interested in any kind of work like that and you want to collaborate with us, please send me an email. I will be happy to integrate you to the project. So what you are seeing in the screen is basically very much the kind of pipeline that we follow to create this historical gazetteer. We really learn very much from this process. And of course, there are the creation of historical gazetteers is very much a full field. So this is to say that you can actually go into the field and do research about it, because it's a really complicated process. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight was that in the creation of this historical gazetteer, although there is quite a bit of information about what are the kind of challenges that one encounters in the creation of a gazetteer and how to go about it, we also encounter all sorts of problems that were specific to colonial history and specific as well to places like Mexico and Guatemala. And so we also wanted to record what were those problems and how we went about solving them in order to create a white paper, basically, or a guideline, let's say, for other people that might want to create also historical gazetteers or get involved into this kind of work and actually have a guidance about it. And this is also going to be published at the end of this year. We also develop, apart from this, more than 70 layers of geographic information, including things like ecclesiastic and civil jurisdictions, among many other things, right? Now, once you have that, something that we imagine and that we have been developing for a while was the capacity to take, let's say, a collection of hundreds of thousands of historical documents and mine information out of these in such a way that you could analyze not only similar pieces of information as such coming from different collections, but also those that are associated to particular geographies. And so we are in the process of developing a software for this method called geographical text analysis. But before I show you that, just for me to explain a bit more the technologies that we use related to this, I also want to show you the ways in which we use artificial intelligence to identify and then extract information from these documents specifically. So the work that we are doing with natural language processing is very interesting. Now, if you haven't heard about natural language processing, this is basically a subdiscipline of computer science and artificial intelligence that aims to teach the computer how human language behaves in written and spoken corpora. And what we are basically developing, and this is related and expands geographical text analysis, is a big data approach that allows the computer to identify and then cross-link and analyze information from this corpora like this one that otherwise will take us a lifetime basically to extract or explore. So for instance, one of the things that we are doing is teaching the computer to automatically identify certain pieces of information in a document. So let's say that I want to know who was involved in the collection of information within the geographic information that is contained within these reports, right? And so with artificial intelligence and natural language processing tools, I can teach the computer what is a proper name with a technique that is called name entity recognition. And so how a proper name basically looks in a document. And so from this, you can identify things like people's names, places, dates, institutions, and so on, right? And so once I have taught the computer to do that, it's now capable of identifying all these in documents that it has never seen before, right? And so from this, there is loads of potential, right? Because I could reconstruct the whole network of people that participated in the collection of these documents, right? So just by identifying the people's names and obviously where they come from and so on, which is something that we aim to do at the project, but the time got short and we are, leaving this for the future, but now we have the possibility to do that. And in the same way as we do proper names, we can also identify all sorts of different things, such as words, but these could be not only keywords, right, but also complex concepts related, for instance, to topics that might be of my interest. So this could include religion, economic resources, animals, plants, diseases, and so on. And if you think about it, this is a very powerful thing, not only in terms of how you will be searching information in historical documents in the future, this is to say, not only by keyword, but actually by concept, right? And in addition to that, it will allow you to cross-reference as well information across, for instance, thousands of books, where if you want to look at the mention of a particular disease, and its relationship to it, I don't know, to specific geographies, you can actually do so. So for this, we also had to go through a process, right, where we needed to decide how best to annotate or to train the models behind the annotation of this collection. And so as a team, we basically had to design or to think about particularly an ontology that we could use to train the data sets behind and then do experiments with natural language processing to see how these things work best. And it was a really interesting thing in terms of working with industry, because we created a partnership with Tacto, which is an artificial intelligence company that dedicates precisely to natural language processing and the annotation of data. And we are carrying out research with them in terms of how to best annotate these documents and how to expand also annotations to all sorts of different concepts behind the ones that we were interested with the geographic reports of New Spain. And so coming back to the geographical text analysis software that I was telling you about, one of the ideas that we developed at the Spatial Humanities project was the creation of a methodology combining natural language processing, corpus linguistic analysis, and geographic information systems. And so the main idea behind this method was to teach the computer, firstly, to identify those places that are mentioned in an historical source and assign coordinates to it. And this is a process called geoparsing. Then to identify those keywords or concepts as I just show you that are of my interest, and then to run a query that will allow me to extract all sorts of information, not from one, but as I was saying before, from thousands of historical records at the same time, and then present them in such a way that I can obviously use for further analysis, right? So I'm not going to have that much time to actually go through the methodology that we use, but I'll try to explain it relatively quickly. So the first thing that we need to do is to have digitized sources, right? So we start by digitizing the sources that we want and creating them in or converting them into a format that we call, well, basically running text. So you can basically do analysis with it, computational. Then we fed those to the computer and then carry out this name entity recognition process that allow us to identify all the proper names within that collection. We then, after that, added another step, which was basically the annotation and then the automatic annotation of all the concepts of our interest, as I was saying before. And then we carried out another step that is called surpassing, right? So with the gazetteer, we basically match the text with the historical gazetteer, and that allows us to assign coordinates to all the places that are mentioned within that historical collection. And so after that, we basically carry out something else that we created that is called geographic collocation analysis. So that allows to identify any concept of our interest and how these are related to particular geographies. And I'm going to give an example in a second. And so the output from this is very interesting, because from that we can basically either do further analysis at many different scales. So we can do what is called distant reading, or we can also do close reading of the text. And we can also input this in geographic information systems and then carry out all sorts of spatial analysis. So in this particular case, for instance, we can map the specific mention of a particular keyword of my interest or a particular concept, right? And this is precisely what the geographical text analysis software that we are developing does. So you input a gazetteer and then an historical corpus, and then you can then run queries that can retrieve all those instances that mention the concept that is of your interest and whether this is related to a particular geography, right? So in the case that you actually see in the screen, so this is the example of a query looking at all those instances in the relaciones corpus, looking for a type of disease that the Nahua call cocolistle. So in fact, cocolistle is actually a term that is believed to probably belong to many different diseases. It was not only one disease, but is particularly the term that they use for the disease that causes the main epidemics of the 16th century, right? And so in this case, what we are looking at is the result of running a query with geographical text analysis software that allows to capture all the mentions of this disease. And as you can see, you have spelling variations as well of this particular term, and its context to the left and to the right in the actual historical source. So each of these lines is basically a mention of this disease within the historical corpora, right? So you can actually see what is being said about the disease. And it also provides you with other interesting but also important information and metadata, right? So in this particular case, it's telling me how we annotated this disease, so the categories or the entities that we selected to annotate this particular disease. And then it's also telling us whether this particular mention of this disease falls in the context of a particular geography. And this is done in such a way that tells us the geography where this mention comes from. It tells us the geographic coordinates as well. And it tells us as well which is the volume of data from which the mention is coming from. So if I actually click on one of these records, it takes me then to the geographic reports from which this mention is being taken from. And so from this, you can then input again into a geographic information system and see all the places that are related to this disease as portrayed, let's say, in this source during the 16th century. So what this gives you is very much kind of like supercharged way to query complex information, to visualize it, and then of course to also carry out the spatial analysis of it. So among the first case studies that we are carrying out in collaboration with other researchers are looking precisely at the study at a larger scale of how settlement patterns change over time. particularly during the 16th century, and also how the major epidemics happened, but particularly how these were spoken about in historical sources. There have been loads of different studies on, how epidemics happen in New Spain, but the majority of sources have concentrated in 3 major epidemics, and the reason for that has been precisely because the main, let's say, most iconical sources actually focus on those, and there has been not that many explorations of how these diseases and particularly epidemics happen across the whole of the New Spain. And as part of this work, we have also created a series of quite interesting resources that are more related to public engagement. So these are called Pathways to Understanding 16th Century Mesoamerica. And you can see the link there. So these are 3 main story maps. So these are kind of like resources that you can use for teaching, for instance, or if you want to know a bit more about toponymy, the history of Mexico, and how geographies are basically depicted in the geographic in the geographic reports of New Spain. These resources are quite a good starting point. And finally, regarding the Digging into Early Colonial Mexico project, we have created 2 electronic versions of the 12 volumes of Relaciones Geográficas and the Suma de la Visita de los Pueblos. So the first one is what we call machine-ready corpus. So this is to say a clean and without notes edition and so on. So these are in simple TXT files. So this can be used for any computational process, searching and so on. And the second version is the fully annotated corpus with all the categories that you saw on the NLP example. And all these sources, the gazetteer, the database, the software, and the corpora will be freely available, open source, and released by the end of this year precisely. So the last thing that I want to talk about today is this new project called Unlocking the Colonial Archive. And I'll be brief because we just started this project, but it's really promising. We actually have some results of just freshly at the moment, but anyway, I'm quite excited about this because we are tackling what could be considered some of the most interesting challenges when working with colonial, indigenous, and Spanish historical sources from the perspective of computational approaches. And so, as you can see in this slide, this project is funded by the AHRC and the National Endowment for the Humanities from the US and the UK. And this is a collaboration basically between Lancaster University, Liverpool John Moores University, and the University of Texas at Austin. And we also have very interesting academic and industry partners, including UNAM and WAP, ENA, Fordham University, the University of Alicante, and industry partners like Tactile, Lucentia Lab, and Transcribes as well. Now, the project has as its main objective, and the actual title says so, to harness diverse aspects of artificial intelligence to tackle and advance some of the challenges to access information in colonial archives, right? So we are looking at, or we are working on 3 main research areas. And the first one is handwritten text recognition. So as historians can probably testify, one of the main difficulties or barriers in studying primary sources is paleography, right? It is a skill that might not only take years to develop, but it's also a quite time-consuming task. Now, you have probably heard or actually used a technique that is called optical character recognition, or OCR. So this is basically a computational technique that allows you to transform an image into vectors, and in this particular case, into characters, right? So this is the facility that allows you to take a PDF and convert it into running text and to put it, for instance, into Word, right? And this works really well with modern languages and characters that are typeset. And the way that artificial intelligence does this is through machine learning algorithms, where you can basically teach the computer what a character looks like, and then it will attempt to recognize these same characters in samples that it hasn't seen before, right? Now, in the past few years, there has been substantial developments on a technique that is kind of like the coding of OCR, but that focuses on transforming handwritten text into electronic text. And this is what we call handwritten text recognition. And again, this is more easily said than done because there are a series of problems that are especially difficult with handwritten material. So just to begin with, there is enormous variability between hands, right? So not to mention that these technologies have been mainly developed for modern European languages and definitely not for a combination of 16th century Spanish and indigenous languages such as, Nahuatl, Otomi, Zapotec, and so on, right? So in this project, we are teaching the computer how the early colonial archive basically looks like. And hopefully by the end of it, we will have a series of models that can be used to achieve or at least facilitate the automated transcription of historical primary sources in Latin America. And as I said, we run already a first experiment that happily was successful. So, things are advancing quite in an interesting way. And in the second area, we will be working with, again, natural language processing. And what we will be doing here will be to continue to expand the work that we have already done on the Digging into Early Colonial Mexico project, where we will expand ontologies and the concepts to create annotated primary sources that go well beyond the relaciones geográficas, because the relaciones geográficas, if you are a little bit familiar with them, you will know that they portray very interesting but particular type of information, right? So there are other sources as well that we need to think about in terms of how to annotate, identify concepts and so on. And of course, I need to say that for all these, we are working with the vast collection at the Lilas Benson at the University of Texas at Austin, the Fondo Real de Cholula in Puebla, and material from the Archivo General de la Nación in Mexico as well. And finally, the last area of research of the project, and this is probably the most experimental one, will be to attempt to teach the computer how to automatically or semi-automatically recognize elements in important pictorial documents using computer vision. And so these include the maps of the relaciones geográficas and the vast fondo of maps as well and images from the AGN. And so in this particular case, what we are aiming to achieve is to help the researcher in the process of the identification of toponyms, for instance, and symbols among many others. And the idea behind this is quite similar with what we do with text, but would expedite research in terms of images. And so let's say that you are looking, for instance, for a specific toponym, which in the Mesoamerican tradition, you might know that takes the form of a picture at the end of the day. And imagine that you can ask the computer to identify in all codices, maps, and pictorial documents where the toponym of Chilapan, let's say, appears, just to say something, right? And from there, we can augment this with all sorts of contextual information and imagine that we can connect this data set with historical gazetteer and so on, right? So the potential is great, but we will let you know how it goes. We have run already also some experiments with these that are also going really well. We know that the computer can identify specific buildings and features here and there. So that's really fantastic, but we need still to refine all sorts of methods and processes for these to be a bit more interesting and sophisticated as well. And so I just want to leave you with a couple of resources basically as well that I will paste in a second in the chat as well. These story maps that I was telling you as well about, and the websites as well for our projects. And you can ask me about them if you want. So I'm going to leave it there. But please feel free to contact me if you want to participate with us in the creation of these resources and also, with research with us. And we will be announcing a series of events and workshops in which we will be teaching this kind of technologies and how it works and so on. And in fact, our first Institute of Paleography and Digital Humanities is going to be advertised later either this week or early next week if you're interested. So we will put this on Twitter and so on. So I hopefully, if you are interested, we will see you there. So thank you very much. And I'm delighted to answer any question that you may have.
Thank you very much, Patti. This has been totally astounding. It's like a dream for many of us who have attempted to undertake research on with early modern documents. Well, I myself have several questions, but I would like to ask the audience as well to feel free to ask their questions. If you could please stop sharing your screen so that maybe we can see who's here. And las preguntas, como siempre, también pueden ser en español. They can be in either English or Spanish. Well, one of my questions I believe you have already answered, and that is whether the relaciones are printed or manuscript material, but I gather it's printed, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was originally manuscript, but we work with the detailed collections that were transcribed basically by René Acuña and Mercedes de la Garza a few years ago. So yeah, certainly we started from that perspective precisely because it was easier in a way for us to take that material, and UNAM actually facilitated all the materials because they are collections that were edited by UNAM.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. And the other question is, where are they kept? Where are the originals kept? Or are there several copies or just one? Or
yeah, so they are basically dispersed in three main collections. The Lila Svensson, for instance, has a great part of it. There are others as well in other libraries too. So they are basically kept apart, but they are available also through digital means. At least Lila Svensson, for instance, has the whole collection online.
Mm-hmm. That is amazing. And well, yeah, the difficulty of availability is one of the things that has revolutionized research, no? Access to material that would otherwise be lost. And I believe I may have told you about a little project that a few of the people present here have done with me, researching early modern printed texts, looking for representations of Mexico. No? So the type of net that you have developed for fishing out or mining this information sounds ideal, other than the simple keyword search, which was already revolutionary, no, in any case. So yeah, it sounds like I would really
talk about it. Yeah, because we can certainly, we can certainly do sorts of collaborations. Yeah.
Ah, yes, indeed. No, I think this is absolutely fantastic. And the other prospect is that a closer look at these materials is very useful to demystify vague beliefs about what the colonial period was, or whichever period it is that we are studying, no? Because we have, I don't know, the clouds, or rather the tinieblas of history, no? Of centuries ago, that is contaminated by centuries of prejudice, centuries of stereotypes that often have nothing to do with what was actually going on. No?
Yeah, this is an aspect that is quite important for me. I work quite strongly with the colonial history, for instance, and this is one of the things that is quite fantastic from the digital humanities perspective, because we have to think of these technologies, as great help for research in general, but we also have to be very critical about them because they also impose a Western gaze at the end of the day. Like geographic information systems is a great example because GIS provides you with a bird's eye view of the world, right? Which not all societies, and particularly pre-modern societies, share, right? So you can use geographic information systems to carry out all sorts of spatial analysis and landscape and so on, but you still have to think very critically and carefully whether this is, what kind of picture this is giving you, because this is a very Western, Cartesian, Euclidean way of looking at the world, right? So yeah, that point that you raise is really interesting.
It's both sides, no? Because we have a closer look, but we still have to relativize our present perspective. No?
Absolutely.
So it goes both ways, but still I am a believer that we can unearth a different truth to what we've learned, a more just, so to speak, a more just description of the past.
And it allows us also to bring a diversity of documents that, what you were saying before, were not necessarily available, right? So we normally, particularly for the history of the conquest, right, and the early colonial period, there has been the case, I mean, I'm not saying everywhere, right, but there has been this case, I think, especially in Mexico, right, like of focusing especially on the Spanish primary sources rather than anything else, although there is a huge school, right? Miguel León Portilla starts with this, and López Austin and all these people as well have very much pointed out the difficulty of not looking at indigenous sources. But with this kind of technology, you can also bring together all of it, not only few or one perspective or the other. You can actually bring both of them. So it's quite an interesting, I would say, set of methods for research.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And we have a question here from Maria Jose, who says, thanks, the projects are amazing. Can you share some experiences related to building interinstitutional, transnational and interdisciplinary collaborations in the project? That aspect is also fascinating, the amount of institutions that have collaborated.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think, all these projects, at least the kind of goals that we have, in order to be successful, they truly have to rely on interdisciplinarity, right? And directly very collaborative approaches. So we, at the beginning, I will say that we were very forward in terms of, declaring very clearly what were the goals that we had, what were the kind of things that we could create together. So we explore our partnerships in all sorts of different ways. So with the University of Lisbon, for instance, we did, previous to this large project, we did 2 little projects looking at, how could we map particularly places related to literary sources, and we explore really interesting literature, particularly from the UK and so on. So we kind of like test our relationships in terms of collaboration before we embarked into a larger project. But to me, it has been always a fantastic experience just to approach someone that was not necessarily part of my network. So the other PI in this project, Bruno Martins from the University of Lisbon, the way that I just approaching was that I was looking for papers that could help me on the geoparsing process, and he's a computer scientist, and he particularly dedicates to geographic information sciences, and so he has written several papers about this. And so I found them in academia.edu, and I thought, oh, that's a really interesting paper, can I have it? And I asked him, can I have your paper, because it's really amazing and I don't have access to it through my university thing. And he said, oh, yeah, that's fine. Actually, that is a very old paper, which was actually just 1 year before. But, computer scientists publish at a rate that is, really impressive. And so he just sent me a new paper, and we established our collaboration like that. He asked me, what are you doing? And I'm interested how it comes you are an archaeologist. He has never worked with humanities people before. And so we, just established this really interesting relationship. And I have to say that the same with our industry partners. It has been just like that, just, knocking doors and saying, this is what we do. I think, your work is really interesting from us, from this perspective. Is there anything that we can do together? And, we have been very lucky in that sense. We have always had very positive experiences.
That is fantastic. That is fantastic. There is a comment here from Jean McNair. She says, many thanks for the excellent presentation of this amazing work. It's so inspiring to understand how this work and techniques are developing. Yes, indeed, very much indeed. And well, this also takes me to another, I think, very relevant question, very relevant from the perspective of some digital humanists, you may know, the language of the products, no? Because is it everything in English, or what is the balance between English and Spanish that you have been able to reach, or in the indigenous languages as well?
Yeah, so basically the annotations and so on that we have done, we normally do them in English, right? So this is for a different series of reasons, but the majority of outputs as well, our website too has a version in Spanish. Obviously the Relaciones Geográficas are in a combination of Spanish and 69 different indigenous languages, so we don't do anything with those in that sense. But the rest of it, we try to work multilingually, precisely because of the reasons that you were speaking about before, Elena, which is to reach really the audiences that are relevant for us. I mean, we work in Europe and in this environment because aquí nos tocó vivir, ¿no? But at the end of the day, I think the work that we are doing is precisely to advance scholarship and research in Mexico. So we have done different workshops in there, and we focus much of our work there as well.
Excellent. Are there any other comments or questions that you have? This is also a bit overwhelming, no? Yes, there is some, Maria Jose again. She is asking, what should be the impacts of applying computational methods for research on early colonial historiography? Are historians of the period dialoguing with this project?
I think we are at the time that is starting to happen, Maria Jose. I think it takes a while, in a way, for disciplines to start realizing that there are particular data sets that might be of interest to them. I think one of the main barriers that we might have is digital literacy, right? So, and what I mean by that is that we have created this digital gazetteer, historical gazetteer, and so this can be used with geographic information systems, but that basically means that you need to know about geographic information systems. And in a way, this is one of the reasons why we decided as well to actually do, apart from the GIS data set, also the online database. So, it was more accessible in that sense. And we are, the whole of the gazetteer, it will be also available in KML format. So this is to say you can open it in Google Earth, because many historians are now used to just, opening files there. So you can explore a bit more easily this kind of data set. And I think that it will take time, right, as well, because although we have been in communication with historians and archaeologists and many people around, we haven't released the data sets yet, right? So it has been a promise for 3 years that we are finally, releasing and accomplishing this year. And so I think from there, many people will just take and run with it, because I think the data sets that we have produced have truly the potential to, help historians and archaeologists to do really fantastic things and fantastic explorations. And the funny thing about these methods as well is that do not work only for history and archaeology. These are methods that can be applied to any kind of textual source, right? So if you are a sociologist, for instance, working on crime pattern analysis or whatever that is, you can apply geographical text analysis. You will be able to, use this software as well. So, and even for modern times, as an archaeologist, for instance, we always wonder how the construction of discourses in our disciplines work, right? And with my postdocs, for instance, we continually have these discussions that are quite interesting about what are the discourses that archaeologists basically pose, or produce in the narratives that we publish. And if you take this methodology, for instance, and analyze for the last 50 years, whatever has been published, let's say for a particular period, in a particular journal, you might be able to identify patterns specific, I don't know, to gender, maybe to specific areas of interest, or identify as well bodies, right, of let's say areas of interest as well. So yeah, so these methods actually work in many different ways, and so the disciplines that can engage with these methods go well beyond history and archaeology.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. We have Marisela Daniel Velasco, who says, thank you very much for this presentation. The doors it has opened for future work and cooperation are amazing. I agree. And Maria Jose says, I think this happens with HTIS de las Indias. I don't know what that is, sorry.
It's a fantastic project, yeah.
Data sets and little literacy to use them for research. That's a thing, no, that you need to be taught how to use them. And that I think to construct also the bridge, the generational bridge, because some researchers, perhaps younger researchers, will be more open or flexible, or they will be improving the system as well. But for older researchers, less technological, then they might need something. They have the knowledge to know which questions to ask, but not how to take advantage of those. Because as you say, these tools can save you a lifetime of work, or many lifetimes, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a really interesting point. I mean, if you don't mind me, I will advertise shamelessly our MA in Digital Humanities at Lancaster, because it is precisely, you know, within this kind of master's degree where we are opening all this cutting edge research to new researchers, but also others, right? And specifically now, Lancaster University has opened very good possibilities. We have opened some of our scholarships, for instance, for PhD and masters to international students. So, you know, if you want to have a look at those things, we teach precisely all these methods and all the theoretical background behind all this as well in there. But at the same time, I think it's very important for us as humanities scholars to actually think about the development of software that is thought and precisely rooted in humanities-based research, because the majority of technology that we use normally comes from environmental, you know, or other kind of sciences, and we adopt these kind of tools, and that is fantastic. And you know, they might work really well, but they might not be the most suitable for the problems that we have, right? And the humanities fields, you know, history, archaeology, literature have very different problems as well, but at the same time, we deal with data that can be very uncertain, that is vague, with concepts that can be very complex, that change over time, and there is not the certainty, you know, that sometimes, particularly in the sciences, people try at least to portray, right? So I think it's very important also in the future, in terms of technological developments, to focus on how we can achieve the development of technologies that are, you know, centered on humanities-based thinking.
That's fantastic. Yes, yes. And we'd also love to know about the events that you have planned that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, sure. If you have a look at our Twitter feed, either mine or the Lancaster University Digital Humanities Hub Twitter account, we will be announcing all these workshops and things there. And certainly, you know, like we are planning to do this first workshop, and then the next workshop will be about annotation of documents. And this will be in partnership as well with industry, where we will teach people about artificial intelligence and how to use it. And, you know, sometimes it's not as difficult as you know, it sounds. People might think, oh, do I have to, you know, become a computer scientist to use that? And in reality, that is not the case. You just need to learn a bit how the method basically works, and that can be done in a not scientific way. So you don't need to understand the mathematics behind, just, you know, what the method does and so on. And then to actually learn the kind of tools that we are developing, and that will, you know, help you to do exactly what you want to do. That might not be, you know, computer analysis, but, you know, your normal historical research that you carry out, you know, in a daily basis.
Yes, excellent. And to conclude, do you think you could give us a longer taste or a stronger taste of one of the case studies? It could be the disease. Could you tell us some of the findings? Where was it located? Where was the worst hit part for example, or anything relevant that you have discovered in this case or in another that you would like to share with us?
So the case studies are undergoing at the moment, so we don't have the results yet. But what I can tell you now is that, particularly with the one on the diseases, what we have found is a very interesting mixture, for instance, of terminology that is less constant than people tend to believe. So the descriptions, for instance, about diseases and so on tend to be way more diverse than it was previously thought. And it extends, I think, normally to places that haven't been that looked at. And the reason being that, you know, very traditional types of sources are normally the ones that people go to learn and to think about the main three epidemics, right, that happened during the 16th century. But I think this kind of approach and this kind of method is also highlighting the places that are forgotten, let's say, by historians and by archaeologists in that sense. We call this the geographies of absence, right? So is this kind of like voids where historians do not look at for a series of reasons, right? It might be the lack of documents, it might be just that are not, you know, the most iconic or the most related to larger seats of power, right? Like at the end of the day, I don't know, like central Mexico, right? So there are really, really interesting things to draw upon, just mapping the mention of diseases and the different type of diseases. And another following thing that we are already kind of like seeing that that will be really interesting is to also have a look at how these diseases were tackled, how they are spoken about in terms of emotion. So whether they are described with fear, with contempt, you know, like all sorts of different emotional responses that you can actually capture to a certain extent in the sources, and also the remedies for this, what is, you know, used at the end of the day, not only as mentioned in the Relaciones Geográficas, but in many other historical sources as well. So yeah, but hopefully, you know, in the not too distant future, I will be able to share yeah, the kind of results that we are achieving with that.
And this points to the decolonization of knowledge and of these sources, right? Exactly, by the putting on under the light the geographies of absence and that sort of new discovery of old things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, Patty. If there are no more questions, which I think there aren't, I think we are all mute with admiration at what you have presented. Yes, dumbfounded is the word. Thank you again. Thank you to all of you who have been today with us. Tomorrow we are having, this is part of the 500th anniversary commemorations of the fall or surrender of Tenochtitlan. Tomorrow we have a play from the New Spain that is done experimentally with the tools that offered by Zoom. And we would be very happy if you could join us and watch it from either YouTube or Facebook. And thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing all of you again. Goodbye.